Good morning, everyone. My name is Ayrton Coles, and on behalf of our Tennessee Transportation Assistance Program here in Knoxville, I would like to welcome you to our webinar today. The Safe Systems Approach, what is it, and why is it getting so much attention? We'll be here between 11 and 12 p.m. Eastern Time. So thank you so much for Mr. Mark Doctor for being here with us and agreeing to help us out with this webinar. Mark provides technical assistance and training to advance the application of innovative and performance-based safety and design practices on a national level. Mark began his career with the FHWA in 1988 and gained engineering experience through several positions in the FHWA Florida Division Office and right here in Tennessee on the FHWA Division Office. Mark has served in his current position with FHWA Resource Center Safety and Design Team since 2005, where he provides technical services in the areas of geometric design, intersection safety, innovative intersections, freeway interchange design, and the safe system approach. Mark receives a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from Clemson University and a master's in transportation engineering from the University of Florida. He's a registered professional engineer in the state of Georgia. One more thing before I hand things over to you, Mark. All those of you that are participating today, please type your full name in the chat box. If you have several people with you in the office, make sure you have everybody's name there. If you're calling from a phone or if you're from TDOT, calling from TDOT, please let us know your name as well on the chat box. Try to keep your camera off during the presentation, unmute your audio or use the chat box to answer and ask questions. And please address those questions and comments to everyone in the meeting. I will be working on your PDH certificates after the class. It will be based on your sign-in, Zoom analytics, and participation. You should have received an email from us here at TTAP with the workshop materials. If not, please let me know and I'll share that with you. This is not a TTAP class, so just disregard that last paragraph there, that last sentence. So with that said, let me hand things over to you, Mark, and thank you so much for helping us out again.
Thank you, Ayrton. It's great to be here and great to see so many people logged in to learn about the safe system approach. So let me start off by sharing my screen, pulling this up. All right, so let me just do a quick check-in with you, Ayrton, just to make sure that everything looks good on your end.
Full screen mode, and we can see you and hear you well. Thank you.
Perfect. Very good. Thanks. So I'm going to talk about the safe system approach, and it may be new to some folks, or maybe you've heard about it, but it's a little nebulous perhaps to understand exactly what it is, because it's a principles-based concept. And so I'd like to kind of give you my take on what the safe system approach is and how we as transportation professionals, and I'm just based on the register, the roll call here, it seems like most of the participants here are involved on the infrastructure end, the transportation infrastructure end, in one way or another. But the safe system approach is holistic. It does go beyond just roadway countermeasures or roadway design. It is a holistic approach to attacking the road safety problem. And at FHWA, we like to use this tagline that zero is our goal, and a safe system is how we get there. And I guess that's a good way of kind of summing it up as well. A safe system approach is really the way that we advance toward achieving our goal of eliminating death and serious injury on the roadway. So part of why the safe system approach is getting so much attention is that it is a highlighted piece of the US DOT National Roadway Safety Strategy. So a couple of years ago, US DOT issued the National Roadway Safety Strategy. It's the first time that our country has really ever had such a strategy, or at least one adopted or formalized through the U.S. Department of Transportation. And it recognizes the safe system approach as the guiding paradigm And I like that description. It really is a paradigm. It can be thought of as a paradigm shift, a different way of thinking about the road safety problem. The safe system approach is not really new. It's been around for decades with its origins overseas in Sweden and the Netherlands, but has really started to gain a lot of attention in the United States. And so part of what we at the U.S. Department of Transportation, in addition to trying to increase awareness of what the approach is, that bottom paragraph of what is US DOT doing about roadway fatalities? Well, to substantially change how the nation views and addresses roadway safety, the Department of Transportation is working toward institutionalizing the safe system approach as the guiding principle. So that's what I hope to achieve today, is to increase your awareness of what the safe system approach is and what that means regarding institutionalizing the safe system approach as our guiding principle. And to me, what that means is a different way of thinking about the road safety problem. When we think a little differently about a problem, it opens up opportunities for different solutions. And it also involves prioritizing differently than perhaps we have done in the past. And what that ultimately, we hopefully will lead to, is different decisions on what our roadways look like, how we operate our roads, how we design our roads, to have safety be the default choice, to basically build in safety to everything we do. So a lot of introduction here, but when we are done, I hope there are three things that you'll be able to take away from today's session. First is understanding that the safe system approach is principles based. It's not any one thing. That's why people can get a little frustrated when trying to understand it, because it's not any one thing. It's a concept, it's an approach. And there are 6 principles behind the safe system approach, and I'm going to explain what those principles are. So when we talk about, well, are we doing the safe system approach? Well, you're probably doing a lot of things already. Your agency is probably doing a lot of things already that support safety, support the safe system approach, but there are varying degrees to how it's done, or varying degrees to the effectiveness to which we're able to reduce the risk of fatalities or serious injuries occurring on our system. So first, we need to understand the principles, and that's what we're going to accomplish today. Achieving a safe system involves strengthening all 5 elements of the system. So I'll also talk about the 5 elements of a safe system. We in roadway infrastructure, we typically fall into the safe roads element, but we also overlap into some of the other elements. So I hope that by the end of this presentation, you'll have a better understanding of where we fit within the elements of a safe system approach, where we fit. And even though we tend to focus a lot on the safe roads element, I want you to understand that it's not an absolute. There's no such thing as safe or unsafe. It's really degrees of safety. And under a safe system approach, what that translates to is, what is the probability, what is the likelihood that a death or serious injury is going to result on that roadway? And that's based upon certain conditions, certain operating conditions. Speed is a big part of it, other risk factors, but it really comes down to what is the likelihood, the probability of a fatality or serious injury, and what can we do to help reduce that probability. We may never get the probability down to 0, but that's okay, because there are other elements in the system that work collectively, provide redundancy to try to keep a serious outcome from occurring. So let's get into some of the details. But first, it may seem daunting, this notion of 0, right? 0 deaths or serious injuries on our roads, especially when you look at the current numbers. You could say that at best we have plateaued over the last decade. But in reality, we're actually ticking upward in terms of the numbers. It's not a good trend, whereas progress was being made. You could say now that we're heading in the wrong direction. And it's particularly problematic if we look at vulnerable road users, bicyclists, pedestrians. We're seeing a significant increase in terms of fatalities for vulnerable road users. So the safe system approach as our guiding principle or the guiding paradigm. And I think it is a paradigm shift. It's a different way of thinking. So first, it does involve increased collaboration. It's not just an infrastructure initiative. It ties very closely to behavioral safety initiatives as well. It ties very closely to improving vehicle safety. It is a holistic system approach, but it does have a strong link to design and operations, and it places the focus on what can we do to reduce crash severity so that serious harm does not occur. So we are out to eliminate fatalities and serious injuries. And part of the new way of thinking is that we know that human beings, as human beings, whether they're drivers, whether they're pedestrians, whether they're bicyclists, that they are going to make mistakes. And mistakes on the road system can lead to crashes. So when we talk about our vision zero, it's not zero crashes. It's zero deaths and serious injuries. This is a subtle distinction, but a very important distinction to acknowledge. We are not out to make people perfect. People will never be perfect. Crashes are going to happen because human mistakes are inevitable. So the focus now becomes on controlling the outcome of those crashes, keeping them survivable. And we do that with a focus on what is the transferred kinetic energy to the human beings involved in the collision, and how can we keep those collision forces survivable? That's a different way of thinking about the problem. Again, we're not out to eliminate crashes. We're out to eliminate deaths and serious injuries. That is a very important thing to recognize. So I mentioned earlier that the safe system approach is not new. We can trace its origins back to the 1990s in Sweden and in the Netherlands, and it really has expanded globally. And countries like Australia and New Zealand, they've got a good jump on the United States in terms of how they have implemented or gone on their safe system journey. And it really is a journey. And I don't know that you ever fully arrive at your destination, but the good news is along the way, as we implement these safe system strategies, these thoughts, this way of doing business, we see the benefits. And none of these countries have gotten to the point of zero, but they have had significant benefits on road safety, significantly bringing down their fatality numbers. And these countries had also plateaued before implementing a safe system approach. And so we're hopeful that in the United States, the safe system approach can help us start to move the direction, move the needle back downward, where we can make incremental gains, one project at a time, one roadway at a time, one intersection at a time. As we apply the safe system approach, what that essentially means is we're reducing the risk that a fatality or serious injury would occur at that location. But as we know, it doesn't happen overnight. We don't touch every mile of our system. We don't touch every intersection. But when the opportunities arise, those are the opportunities to help us start toward our goal. So I'm going to use this pictograph to help describe the safe system approach. You may have seen similar pictographs, a lot of similarities. The key is the 6 principles and the 5 elements of the safe system approach. The 6 principles are listed in the outer band, and the 5 elements are included in the inner ring. So it starts with the foundational principle that death and serious injury is unacceptable. It's almost like a call to action that our current practices, our current system is delivering over 40,000 fatalities a year. And it was in the high 30,000s, but it's now ticked up to 40,000. And there's many factors that there's a lot of things that we can point to, or potential guesses as to why, to what. But the bottom line is we are not at zero, and we're not even making substantial progress toward reducing the numbers. So we recognize it's almost a call that we know things have to be done differently. And it's about prioritizing safety. If we had the same number of fatalities occurring with airline planes going down, it would basically be a jetliner every day to be the number of fatalities we have on our roads. It's almost like we've become numb. We've become accustomed to the numbers, and things really need to change. And it does start with I think, a shift in our safety culture. The second principle is that humans make mistakes. We are only human. We will never be perfect, whether we're drivers, pedestrians, motorcyclists, bicyclists, transit users. So the system needs to first acknowledge that, yeah, mistakes are going to happen. Our first attempt should be to try to design out opportunities for people to make mistakes that will lead to serious consequences. So mistakes are going to happen, but if they're somewhat minor in terms of what happens as a result, that can be acceptable. It's the higher severity conflicts, the higher severity problems or risks in our system that then become the focus. So the third principle is that humans are vulnerable. We have a certain threshold. It may be a limited threshold, but we have a certain threshold to tolerate collision forces before harm occurs. And as an engineer, I like this principle because I can wrap my head around understanding better how engineers can design and operate our roads with this focus on managing kinetic energy in the system. So as engineers, we use all kinds of parameters or factors in road design, right? If we think about laying out an intersection, and we're concerned about a turning radius of a designed vehicle, right? We design to accommodate whether it's vehicles or people. If you think about timing a traffic signal based upon a assumed pedestrian crossing speed, let's say 3.5 feet per second for a human being to walk and to cross an intersection, right? We take into account all of these things that go into how we lay out a road design. What we haven't done yet is design toward a value of a maximum kinetic energy threshold that could occur if a crash occurs. And so that's really a new way of thinking, or a new way of engineering roads and our system based upon this principle of managing kinetic energy to keep collisions survivable. And so as crash kinetic energy increases, the probability that a fatality or serious injury will occur also increases. But if we keep speeds low, if we keep the severity of conflicts low, lower crash kinetic energy, crashes then become survivable. And it does matter whether we're talking about a vehicle that hits a pedestrian or a vulnerable road user, or a vehicle-to-vehicle collision. If we're occupants in a car, we have protection from our vehicle. We have crumple zones. Our vehicles can absorb a lot of the kinetic energy. So it does depend on the scenario, but no matter what the scenario is, the focus becomes on trying to manage the kinetic energy. So the fourth principle is that responsibility is shared. So I emphasize a lot of the engineering aspects, the infrastructure aspects, but the truth is a safe system approach involves really everybody that's involved. So not just the planners, designers, and operators of the road system, but vehicle manufacturers, law enforcement, traffic incident management, and of course, system users. We are all part of trying to create a safe system. The fifth principle is that safety is proactive. So historically, we could say that our safety programs in the past have really targeted high crash locations. So we try to look at our network and we try to identify where crashes, especially the severe and fatal crashes, are occurring, and going out and trying to do something about it, maybe implementing safety countermeasures. But that's kind of a reactive approach. So under a safe system approach, we try to be proactive, identify the risks ahead of time, and basically design out the most severe conflicts. And then the final principle is redundancy in the system. And this is where the 5 elements of a safe system approach come in. The 5 elements work together, they work collectively, and providing redundancy in the system is really how we get to that point of the elimination of death and serious injury. So it starts with the element of safe road users. And at some point, we're all users of the transportation system, whether we are walking, bicycling, using transit, or driving. We are all users of the system, and efforts to try to improve the safe behavior of all users is a key part of a safe system approach. So we hope that all users obey the rules, obey traffic rules, that they're not impaired, that they're not distracted. We know that that's not always the case. We do have users who are impaired. We do know that distracted driving is a significant risk factor. So we could say that there are weaknesses, definite weaknesses in the element of safe road users, but we need to continue to strive to strengthen this element. But again, not trying to set out to make users perfect, because that will never occur. That will never be the case. So it's about strengthening, not achieving perfection in each of the elements. So behavioral safety, again, a key part of it. I've often been accused of downplaying the importance of behavioral safety in the safe system approach, and I really, that's not my intent. It's just as an engineer, I gravitate a lot toward the infrastructure side. But if you want more information on how behavioral safety is so integral to the safe system approach, there's a great report that came out a few years back from the Governor's Highway Safety Association. It's available on their webpage, and it does a fantastic job of outlining the linkages between the safe system approach and what is done on the behavioral safety side of it. Then vehicular safety. So I am not a car designer. Vehicle safety is not my area of expertise. I'm more into the road design part of it. But vehicle safety technology is a key part of the safe system approach. And we can think of vehicle safety as falling into different types of categories: active safety, passive safety. Active safety, those are things that help avoid a collision or a crash from occurring in the first place. So if you think of things like vehicle lane departure warning systems, or autonomous emergency braking, pedestrian detection, front collision warning systems. All of those are great things that can help hopefully avoid a crash in the first place. But then if a crash does occur, our vehicles offer a lot of passive safety features, seat belts, airbags, great examples, so that if we're in a collision, it helps keep the crash survivable. Crash absorbing features, crumple zones, all of these are things that help make crashes survivable. And then the new technology that is coming and or ever evolving in vehicle safety to the point of some point in the future with connected and automated vehicles as companies continue to evolve and look at driver control systems, and they continue to advance. We hope that leveraging that advancing technology will also pay off in terms of improved safety. So it's very important for vehicle safety to also be a big part of a safe system approach. Speed. So the safe speed element. Yeah, we have to have speed in the system. Without speed, we're not moving. So there will always be speed. It's at the heart of transportation, but having speeds match, having operating speeds, vehicular operating speeds appropriately match the conditions that the roadway allows. That's a key part of the safe system approach. So we can engineer some roads to accommodate higher speeds, like a freeway, like an interstate. If we think about the forgiving clear zones, if we think about a separation between opposing directions of traffic, we don't have pedestrians, we don't have bicyclists, or at least not not normally or not legally on a freeway. So those are examples of how roads can be designed or engineered to accommodate higher speeds to a certain degree. Obviously, at very high speeds, the things can change quickly, and in fact, we're learning quickly that some of our assumptions, even like a forgiving roadside side slope, that a 6-to-1 side slope is easily traversable. Well, maybe not if someone is going at an excessive rate of speed, and if a vehicle flips over. We know that is a much higher degree of severity. So there's limitations, obviously, but within normal use and within normal appropriate use, speeds can be designed, or we can design roads for desirable speeds. But if I'm in a urban context and I have vulnerable road users, pedestrians, bicyclists, and I have this mixing of pedestrians and cyclists with vulnerable road users, obviously the speeds need to be lower. So it's really an exercise in understanding what the most critical or what the most vulnerable crash type could be. Most of the time, that is a collision between a vehicle and a pedestrian. So that's the most critical in this example here that we show on this chart. But let's say I take pedestrians out of the equation. Maybe I have a separated pathway for my vulnerable road users. So then oftentimes the next most critical collision would be either hitting a roadside object or at an intersection. If I have a T-bone type crash at an intersection, someone runs a red light or blows through a stop sign without stopping, and we have that 90-degree angle of collision, we actually have less protection from our vehicles on the side doors. Whereas in the rear of the vehicle or the front of the vehicle, we have more of a crumple zone. A lot of times less protection if impacted at a high speed on the side. So depending upon what the crash scenario is, trying to keep the collision forces survivable, trying to reduce that risk of a fatality. So safe roads are very much linked to safe speeds, but safe roads are a separate element of a safe system approach. And really our focus is on trying to prevent crashes from occurring in the first place, especially the most severe type of crashes. But then when crashes do occur, keeping them survivable. And so I like to describe it as more of a continuum for the safe roads element, that everything we do, all of our design and operational strategies kind of function on this continuum, that if we are able to increase our consistency with the safe system principles, what that really means is that we are reducing the risk of a fatality or serious injury from occurring. So it's not really an absolute, but this continuum, and to keep shifting down that continuum. No road or no intersection may ever eliminate that risk of a fatality or serious injury, but that is okay because the other elements of the system can kick in to help prevent against a fatality or serious injury. So some examples of what we can do in road design and operations, well, to avoid crashes from occurring in the first place, or at least the severe crashes, for vulnerable road users, this idea of having physical separation, separating vulnerable road users in space, or even separating vehicles. If you think about a median on a divided highway, a high-speed divided highway, or a barrier, a median barrier, even a cable median barrier in the median of a freeway. All of these are examples of separating users in space. If we can't separate the conflicts in space, we can separate them in time. So a traffic signal at an intersection is a great example of separating users in time. And enhancements like perhaps a leading pedestrian interval or a exclusive pedestrian crossing phase at a traffic signal. These are examples of things that can be done to try to separate users in time, or other traffic control devices. If we think about a pedestrian hybrid beacon, another example of separating that conflict in time through a traffic control device. And then traffic control devices can also be used to help increase the attentiveness or awareness of the various users. And then if a collision does occur, there are engineering strategies that essentially help manage the crash kinetic energy. Speed management is a big part of this, but also our design. A roundabout is a great example of this concept at an intersection. If you think about the scenario of a driver who's totally inattentive, and for whatever reason, they're approaching an intersection, let's say a signalized intersection, the light is red. If they run the red light knowingly or unknowingly, it almost doesn't matter, that they blow through a red light. Red light running, we know, is a serious problem across the country. It happens. It's going to happen. All right. So if a collision results, well, yeah, let's say there's a T-bone crash with another vehicle that's going through the intersection in the other direction. They've got the green light, obviously. It's usually a high severity, high kinetic energy crash. And what could we do from an engineering standpoint to help reduce the risk of a fatality or serious injury? Well, think about that same scenario, but this time, instead of it occurring at a signalized intersection, what if it occurs at a roundabout? So we have an inattentive driver approaching the intersection, approaching a roundabout this time. And typically the geometry of the approach of a roundabout attempts to slow traffic down. If you think about the splitter island as you're approaching a roundabout, or the curvature, the successive reverse curvature that a splitter island can sometimes form, that effectively slows people down. But let's say in this scenario, it doesn't. Let's say someone doesn't even slow down and they violate the traffic control device. So at a roundabout, that would be the yield sign. So they fail to yield. They just blow right into the roundabout at a fairly high speed. And let's say they collide with a vehicle that is in the circulatory roadway of the roundabout. Well, what's different at a roundabout? Well, first, the speed of the other car, the car that's in the circulatory roadway. So if you think about the radius of a roundabout, that controls the speed that vehicle can go at. So oftentimes the second vehicle, or the vehicle that's being hit, is traveling at a lower speed. That reduces the kinetic energy of the crash. But what also reduces the kinetic energy of the crash is the angle of impact. So instead of a 90-degree T-bone crash at a signal or a stop-controlled intersection, at a roundabout, that collision is more likely to be about 40 degrees. And research on kinetic energy management and some of the kinetic energy management modeling that has been done in other countries, Australia in particular, have really started to show the benefit of the decreased crash kinetic energy just by changing that angle of impact. It makes the crash more survivable. And so, if nothing else, a roundabout changes that angle of collision. It changes the speed of at least one vehicle in the intersection, in the crash, and it can help make the crash survivable. So I do like to use roundabouts as kind of the poster child of what we can do in engineering and road design that applies these safe system principles toward keeping crashes more survivable. And then similarly with roadway departure crashes, things like barriers and roadside features that are crash worthy, all examples of keeping crashes survivable. And then the last element, post crash care, I like to think of it as the last line of defense. And post crash care certainly includes first responders, but it also includes crash investigation. So there's an engineering component to it as well. Also, the medical care, the quality of the medical care that crash victims receive. And this notion of timely response is a big concern in rural areas. You know, a lot of times, if we are more than an hour away from the nearest hospital or trauma center, that golden hour, the time between someone getting injured, hurt seriously, and when they first receive medical attention, that can make the difference between life and death. And so in rural areas, our post-crash care element may be weaker, sometimes significantly weaker than in an urban area where the same crash occurs, same amount of kinetic energy, same amount of injury or trauma to the humans involved, but whether we can get rapid medical attention or not can make the difference between life and death. So arguably in a rural context, this element is perhaps weaker, and so we need to strengthen the other elements to help compensate for that weakness. But there are other parts of post-crash care as well. Certainly, how the media articulates crashes, and we want to avoid victim blaming. We want to keep the focus on how we can prevent crashes in the first place. That's a big part of this different way of thinking. The judicial system has to be a big part of post-crash care as well. If we have users who are repeat offenders, whether it's driving while impaired or violations of other laws, we have traffic laws for a reason. And so we need to strengthen those judicial mechanisms to help strengthen this post-crash care element. And there's also an engineering side to post-crash care or incident response. If you think of things like signal preemption systems at intersections so that we can get medical attention out quicker. There's an example of an overlap between engineering and strengthening post-crash care. So the elements work together, even though we often think of them independently. Under a safe system approach, they work together. I love this analogy of the Swiss cheese model to help drive this point home. So each of the elements will inherently have weaknesses. And think of the weaknesses as being the holes in the Swiss cheese. And we'll always have holes. If there were no holes, it wouldn't be Swiss cheese, right? It'd be some other type of cheese. So Swiss cheese has holes, and the holes are weaknesses. And we may never eliminate those weaknesses, but that's okay. We want to strengthen the elements, and we can visualize that as shrinking the size of the holes, making the holes smaller. And the five elements are like five slices of cheese, not cut from the same block, but let's say five random slices of Swiss cheese. And hopefully the holes don't line up. If you put the five slices together, hopefully we've blocked off the opportunity for an event, a risk, let's say a crash, and for the strength in each of the elements to help compensate, to provide layers of protection, redundancy against the death or a serious injury resulting. So that's a good way of thinking about how the elements work together. So it's a journey. Implementing a safe system approach really is a journey. It's a different way of thinking about the safety problem. It's not about preventing crashes. It's really about preventing death and serious injury. It's a subtle but important distinction. Improving human behavior, yes, we still are trying to do that, but really we're also trying to design for the behavior that we want to see. And that can include road design features that provide self-explaining roads when it comes to the appropriate speed that we want users to go at. If we want high speeds, then designing the road to design out some of those more serious conflicts, especially our vulnerable road users. There are times when we may have to physically separate the most vulnerable road users if vehicular speeds are going to be high. Controlling speeding or managing speed is a big part of the safe system approach, but it's ultimately about managing the kinetic energy that would occur in a collision to keep them survivable. And a shift from individual responsibility to this notion of shared responsibility and to be proactive. So we still want to be data driven. We still want to look for where our system has a high occurrence of crashes, but perhaps more importantly is being data driven to identify the risks that are inherent in the system ahead of time. So not just focusing on high crash locations, but focusing more on high risk locations and trying to proactively reduce that risk, mitigate for it. So I started at the beginning with this notion that institutionalizing the safe system approach is our guiding principle. What does that really mean? Well, it means different thinking, different priorities, and hopefully ultimately leading to different priorities. And I just want to close with a little overview of a new FHWA tool that just came out earlier this year, just published back in January. And it's the Safe System Roadway Design Hierarchy. And you can you can view this, you can download this from our FHWA website. Quick search will get you right to it. The Safe System Roadway Design Hierarchy. It's a tool that we hope agencies can start using to apply these safe system principles onto projects and also onto program decision making. So prioritizing perhaps where and how your safety investments are made. And the hierarchy revolves around 4 tiers. And this is something that I'm not going to say we stole it. We were inspired by our friends in public health. Yeah, we kind of stole it, but they inspired us because in public health or also in occupational health and safety, they had a hierarchy of effectiveness, a very similar hierarchy, a triangle or a pyramid of effectiveness. And as you might imagine, the best thing that we can do is to design out or remove the hazard. And so in this occupational safety pyramid of effectiveness, that was the top tier. What can you do to design out? And then the lesser tier things were administrative controls and personal protective equipment kind of on the bottom. So using that as an inspiration for roadway design, this safe system roadway design hierarchy kind of mimics that. So the top tier, the most effective thing that we as transportation engineers can do is to remove those severe conflicts. So I'll use an intersection again as a good example. It's not practical that we're going to remove the intersection, although theoretically we could grade separate an intersection and make it an interchange. But for the most part, we're talking about at least removing the most severe conflicts. So at an intersection, if you think about taking a signal or a stop controlled intersection and converting it into a roundabout. So at a roundabout, we've taken out those most severe conflicts. We've taken out those crossing conflicts and just changing them. We've reduced the number of conflicts. We've changed the conflicts to less severe conflicts. So that's an example of a tier one strategy. Another example of a tier one strategy that removes the conflicts would be if we physically separate the vulnerable road users, provide a separate path for peds and bicyclists. Those are examples of tier one. And then for the other tiers, tier two, here's some examples as we go through each. So tier one, remove the severe conflicts, roundabouts, separated bike lanes, separated pedestrian crossings, all good examples. Tier two, things that reduce speeds. And these can also include roundabouts, but other strategies or design measures. If we do a lane reconfiguration, whether it's a traditional road diet or some other form of a roadway reconfiguration that helps slow vehicular traffic, while also traffic calming features, horizontal deflection, vertical deflection. Vertical deflection can include things like a raised crosswalk, like a raised intersection. All these are examples of ways to help reduce speeds so that if crashes occur, at least they are more survivable. Tier three involves things that manage conflicts in time, usually through a traffic control device. So a pedestrian hybrid beacon, a exclusive pedestrian phase, or a leading pedestrian interval. But there are other things, simpler things even. If we think about a signalized intersection where instead of a permissive left turn or the protected permissive left turn operation, if we went to protected only, take out that permissive phase, you're basically removing the opportunity for a human being to misjudge a gap in oncoming traffic, or taking out the opportunity to have that conflict between a permissive left turning vehicle and a pedestrian that is legally in the crosswalk, that perhaps that left turning driver doesn't see the pedestrian in the crosswalk because the driver's attention is focused on the roadway and oncoming traffic straight ahead, and they're just trying to judge a gap to make the left turn. So their focus is on oncoming traffic ahead, and they probably don't see the pedestrian that may be in the crosswalk until it's too late. So all of these are examples of things that are perhaps somewhat common among your agency, or maybe less common, but all of these are examples of strategies that fall into these various tiers. The last tier being things that raise attentiveness and awareness. A lot of our countermeasures fall into this tier as well. Not that these aren't effective, it's just from a safe system perspective, they are perhaps less likely to avoid that severe conflict. So sometimes with the tier four countermeasures, doing things in redundancy, so having multiple countermeasures that increase attentiveness and awareness can help. So there's varying degrees of how each of these tiered measures can be applied. So think of the tiers also as sort of like a continuum. So maybe we have an existing condition that, let's say it's an intersection. Let's say it's a signalized intersection, and I do have red light running. I do have the high risk of a severe collision occurring. Well, what can I do to shift down that continuum? What can I do to reduce that risk of a fatality or serious injury? Putting in a roundabout would be great. All right, I've at least removed the most severe conflicts. I may not get the risk to zero, but I've significantly reduced the risk of a fatality or serious injury occurring if it's a roundabout intersection. Well, maybe it's not practical or feasible to put in a roundabout, at least not at this point. Are there things that I can do to help physically slow traffic? Perhaps a raised intersection, perhaps raised crosswalks at the intersection. These are examples of ways to physically slow traffic. And the other countermeasures separate conflicts in time, maybe go with a protected only left turn phasing or increasing attentiveness and awareness, providing more devices. All of these are examples of how the tiers would kind of fit in with this notion of moving along a continuum. And so doing what we can when we can helps us shift on this continuum, helping reduce the risk. Maybe never bringing it to zero, but that's okay because the other elements of the system can help tie in. So at the start, I said what I wanted to achieve in this hour is that we would talk about the principles. So I hope you remember that a safe system approach really is principles based, and applying a safe system approach is really how well are we following or adhering to those 6 principles. Achieving a safe system really requires all 5 elements to be strengthened. Remember the Swiss cheese model analogy, and we are not out to eliminate the weaknesses. We will never eliminate the holes. It wouldn't be Swiss cheese if it didn't have holes. We're just trying to shrink the holes and have redundancy in the system so that the 5 elements work together to avoid a serious outcome from occurring. And within our element of focus, the safe roads element, please think of it as a continuum rather than an absolute. And if we can just shift even a little bit down that continuum, what that means is we are reducing the risk of a fatality or serious injury. We may never get it to zero, but that's okay. Just every opportunity we have to reduce the risk, all of those things will pay off in terms of reductions that we will see as we go on this journey of working toward creating a safe system and having our fatality numbers start going back down as we start following these safe system principles. So the Federal Highway Administration continues to work to help practitioners better implement these principles into practice. This is our web page. There's one tool in particular that I like to plug, and that's our FHWA Safe System for Intersections Assessment Framework. It allows practitioners to basically take even innovative intersection designs and apply a system of looking at the exposure, and that can include vehicular volumes, but also pedestrian volumes, bicyclist volumes. So a higher risk intersection may be okay if the volumes are low, if the exposure is low. So this notion of considering exposure, considering severity. Severity includes things like the speed, so through speeds, turning speeds, if we can reduce those so that when crashes occur, we are at least reducing the severity of the crash. And then the risk factors of the intersection. So certain things that, well, for example, a bigger intersection or an intersection where we do have permissive left turn phasing. Those are examples of things that can increase the risk. So risk, exposure, severity, putting those 3 things together into a quantitative assessment method. That is ultimately what the Safe System for Intersections framework is all about. We are also developing a safe system assessment framework for roadway departure crashes. That's not yet complete. It's not yet published, but that's something we hope to get out soon. So please keep checking back with our safe system materials that are out there. And remember, implementing a safe system is really about all of us having a shared role. So with that, I know the hour goes by quickly, but I hope we have some time now for questions, and I'd be happy to take any questions you may have, either in the chat pod or Ayrton, if we want to open it up for people to be able to ask questions.
Yes, thank you, Mark. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, please add it to the chat box or just unmute yourself and ask Mark directly. I had one before, but I believe you already answered that. But there was one that just came here from Eddie. Is there any collaboration between AASHTO and NACTO to streamline guidance?
Ah, great question. So guidance, continuing to help improve. NACTO has some really great publications for the urban context. The AASHTO Green Book, the eighth edition of the Green Book, is making an evolution toward being more performance based. Also, AASHTO is focusing a lot of attention on things like the bicycle design guide, the pedestrian design guide. So yeah, there's still a lot of I'm going to say evolution in our road design guidance, and both AASHTO and NACTO very important and very influential at helping advance these new lines of thinking. So yeah, be on the lookout. The dates, at least for the AASHTO Green Book, at least the eighth edition. It's a work in progress, and we don't know exactly when that may come out, but it's certainly an example of how we are evolving and practices changing and being more performance based.
Thank you. We have somebody from Murfreesboro, Tennessee, asking or suggesting here, like to hear Mark's thoughts on driver education.
Yeah, personally, I get very frustrated to see the lack of driver education as part of our school curriculum. And I think back to when I was in high school and learning how to drive. Yeah, just about everyone took driver education from public schools. But I understand that that's not as common anymore, and a lot of schools, public schools, don't offer driver education for our younger kids. And then, I think that's uh, not a good thing. So we have driver education, driver driver understanding of really kinetic energy. You don't have to be a scientist. You don't have to have gotten an A in high school physics to hopefully understand and appreciate that when we talk about vehicles on the road, it's not just things like how long does it take me to brake and bring my vehicle to a stop, but the influence that speed has on the severity of a collision. If you do think back to high school physics, kinetic energy, the formula is 1/2 mass times the velocity squared. So yeah, mass is a factor. Yeah, vehicles are getting heavier, but the velocity factor being squared, and just the difference in kinetic energy. It's also a big difference. So, let's say the difference between a vehicle traveling at 30 miles an hour versus 40 miles an hour, right? So a 10-mile-an-hour difference, 30 to 40 miles an hour. Well, because the velocity term is squared, if you go up to that higher speed realm, let's say instead of a 60-mile-an-hour collision, it's a 70-mile-an-hour collision. Well, it's still only a 10-mile-an-hour difference, but the kinetic energy is greatly different. So it's not just the a delta of 10 miles an hour at higher speeds. The kinetic energy really just goes up tremendously. So yeah, do most people have that awareness? Probably not. Is it important? Yes. And I do think driver education is critical.
One more question here from Memphis. Why do you think fatality rates increasing recently when we are making cars and roads safer?
Yeah, so we we hope that overall cars are getting safer, although sometimes we make advances and then we have to maybe take a step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So no doubt vehicles are getting heavier. Our vehicle fleet, we have more SUVs, more pickup trucks, more minivans. Some of the larger vehicles can have issues depending on how high up they are, that there are blind spots. And so sometimes if it's a really large vehicle, there could be a pedestrian standing right in front of the vehicle and a driver even not able to see them out the front just because of some blind areas in the vehicle. So there are a lot of factors, perhaps, and they work together. More aggressive driver behavior. I think that that is certainly something that that a lot of agencies see. So there's a lot of factors at play. And under a safe system approach, it really isn't just looking for the silver bullet. It's really about trying to improve all aspects of safety across all of the elements.
All right, thank you. We have two more questions, but before we go there, if anybody needs to leave now, we will not hold that against you to get your certificate. But there's a question here or a request. Please suggest behavior safety programming, and if you know of any funding sources available to fund it.
There are funding sources available through the National Highway Traffic Safety Association through NHTSA that they do offer some funding opportunities for behavioral safety programs.
One interesting questions coming from Memphis. Do you foresee any future legislation to restrict vehicle speeds performance, allowed through the vehicle manufacturing process to further support the safe systems approach? Most standard sedans show a maximum speed of 120 miles per hour or more on the dash. This seems to be contrary to the goal of reducing speeds and fatal crashes.
Yep, very true, very true. But to answer your question about technology, so you can look into what's often referred to as intelligent speed assistance. And there are some agencies that are implementing these technologies on their government fleets. So starting with fleet vehicles to basically keep those vehicles from being able to achieve those higher speeds outside of the appropriate context. So yes, with emerging technology, things are possible. The intelligent speed assistance, something that is also catching on in European countries. I won't hazard a guess as to how long before we start to see some significant increases in the United States, but it's at least starting, and it's starting with certain agencies implementing them on their fleet vehicles. The largest implementation that I'm aware of is actually in New York City, where New York City, the city itself, on their fleet vehicles, city-owned vehicles, implementing intelligent speed assistance technologies. And if you think about the potential cost savings, the liability savings that city government can have as a result of that, I think we will reach a point where these things not only are safer, but from a business and operational standpoint, could make a lot of sense. So yeah, we're hopeful that those technologies will continue to be implemented.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. We have several comments here saying this is fantastic. Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you, Mark. And again, we appreciate your time and your presentation here. It was great. We'll share this with additional folks that registered but were not able to participate today. So thank you, everybody, for being here. Looking forward to see you in our next TTAP webinar or workshop. So have a great day, and I'll talk to you later.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mark. So we had a question or a comment here to send the presentation to everyone. You should have received an email from us where you can download the presentation, but I'll add my email here to the chat box if you're still with us to just send me an email directly and I can send you the presentation. All right, folks, with that, I will end the recording.